The film opens with a teacher giving an assignment to his students to write about their weekend activities. The teacher's name is Germain. Germain is a French literature teacher, and as school begins, he starts checking each student's assignment one by one. Many of the students receive poor grades due to their unclear writing and stories. However, there is one student's assignment that catches his interest with its content, which is very different from the other students' writing. The student's name is Claude. In his assignment, he recounts how this year he made a new friend named Rafa. One day, while coming back from school, Claude sees a child being picked up by their parents. He notices the child's mother, whom he finds very beautiful. This sparks Claude's interest, leading him to come up with the idea of becoming close friends with Rafa so he can get to know his mother better. The ending of the assignment is not finished, but despite this, Germain still gives it a very good grade because he believes the literary sentences in the assignment are excellent. The next day, Germain once again assigned a writing task to his students. Strangely, here we find that the task has already been completed, and when checked, it turns out to be a continuation of the previous day's assignment. In the story, Claude goes to Rafa's house to work on the assignment together. This is one of Claude's plans to get closer to Rafa's mother. Upon arriving at the house, Rafa introduces Claude to his mother, named Esther. He also informs his mother that they will be working on the assignment together. There, Claude continues to observe his friend's mother, and his story in the assignment continues to unfold. Germain then tells the story to his wife, Jenny. She believes that Claude has a talent as a writer, and Germain becomes more curious about the next part of the story. The following day, Germain gives an extra lesson to Claude. He advises him on how to become a skilled writer with a good plot, and he provides literature books from famous French authors. Claude feels delighted because his teacher likes his writing. Claude then gave the continuation of the story to Germain. One night, Claude, along with Rafa and his father, watched a basketball match on TV together. Claude sat next to Esther, who was focused on reading a magazine. Claude could smell Esther's perfume at that moment. This heightened Claude's feelings even more. While they were engrossed in watching TV, Rafa's father suddenly received a call from the office, forcing him to leave immediately. Days passed, and Germain continued to teach Claude how to become a good writer. Claude truly crafted the story based on his experiences to make his writing better. Following the teachings of the teacher, Claude, who was also proficient in mathematics, visited Rafa's house every night. He seemed like a private tutor, always teaching him mathematics. During one of these visits, he intentionally gave a fairly difficult problem to have a chance to see Esther. He overheard Esther and her husband talking, realizing that they were experiencing some problems. During that time, Esther's husband revealed that he wanted to leave his job and start his own business. That night, Claude was caught by Esther, who thought he was eavesdropping on their conversation, and Claude tried to provide various excuses before leaving. Claude eavesdropped on Esther's conversation in her room again. Here, Esther began to suspect Claude's behavior. She wanted to forbid him from coming to their house and intended to find a private tutor for Rafa. Then, at school, Claude told the teacher that he might not be able to continue the story because he was going to find a private tutor for Rafa. Of course, Germain didn't want the story to end there. He was still very curious about the next piece of writing. Boldly, he stole an exam paper from a teacher's locker, and then gave the exam to Claude. This eventually led to Claude and Rafa getting an A grade. Naturally, Rafa's parents were excited that their child received a good grade in the exam. Now, Esther felt pleased that her child was friends with Claude. Until one day, Claude saw Rafa and his father leaving to play basketball. He continued to spy until they had truly left the house, and he began to approach Esther. At that moment, Esther opened the door for Claude and informed him that Rafa was out with his father. Claude then made an excuse to retrieve a book left in Rafa's room. While Esther was searching for the book, Claude suddenly praised the earrings Esther was wearing, saying they were as beautiful as the ones his mother used to have, though sadly, his mother had passed away when he was young. Esther was touched by this and, with her motherly demeanor, opened up to Claude, and their relationship began to blossom. Meanwhile, on the other hand, Germain began to enjoy the plot of the story. Because he was too focused on Claude's writing, he even forgot about his own wife. One day, Claude was invited to dinner by Esther's family to celebrate Rafa's good grades in his exam. Claude's relationship with Rafa's family grew even closer. To avoid raising suspicions about his closeness to Esther, Claude tried to approach Rafa while he was playing basketball. This made Rafa even happier to be friends with Claude. At school, Germain deliberately instructed Rafa to tell his story in front of the class. With shyness, Rafa recounted his friendship with Claude. Due to the many mistakes in his literary writing, he was laughed at by his classmates. This made Rafa feel embarrassed and angry. This incident prompted Claude to find a way to make his writing even more engaging. Claude then instructed Rafa to embarrass Germain by writing an article in the newspaper about a teacher who bullies students in front of the class. Initially, Germain agreed with Claude's idea because he shared the same thoughts. However, after Rafa's article was published in the newspaper, it unconsciously had a direct impact on his life. He was reprimanded by the school principal, and not only that, Rafa's father also came to the school because he was not happy that his child was humiliated by the teacher in front of the class. Meanwhile, Rafa himself was happy because his sense of embarrassment had been repaid. Then one night, during heavy rain, Claude, who was at Rafa's house, was asked by his father to stay overnight. Rafa then showed Claude to a room and provided him with some clothes. In the middle of the night, Claude saw Esther having hormone activities with her husband. He felt hypnotized by Esther's beauty. Claude continued to give Germain the story of his real-life experience, which was also read by Jenny. Although she was also interested in the story, she began to feel that her relationship with her husband was becoming strained. Meanwhile, Claude's relationship with Esther grew closer. They would talk about the beauty of the garden they were observing, and one night, Claude saw Esther and her husband arguing. Esther's husband was caught going to a nightclub, claiming to accompany a colleague from work. However, Esther didn't believe him, and her husband became angry for being accused of something he didn't actually do. Bravely, Claude came out of the room. He then handed a letter to Esther, which, when read, left Esther silent. The next morning, Esther finally spoke to Claude about the letter. It turned out the letter contained a poem with romantic words that captivated Esther. With only beautiful literary writing, Esther finally agreed to give her juicy, creamy cake to Claude. While they were warming up and about to start, Claude realized that their activity had been seen by Rafa. However, Claude himself didn't care and continued their activity. He now became bolder with his writing and no longer heeded his teacher's advice. He also wrote about how he saw Rafa ending his own life due to embarrassment. Germain felt panicked reading Claude's writing. He immediately went to the school to check if the story was true. It turned out the story was not true. Rafa didn't skip school because he had ended his life, he was only absent due to a common flu. Claude deliberately created this story to make the teacher more interested in the content. After learning about the contents of the writing, Germain finally told Claude to stop writing about his real life. He believed that what Claude had done was not right. However, he also realized that he had supported him all this time. Not accepting the teacher's order, Claude then left angrily. Then, after Rafa recovered from his flu, he met Claude to end their friendship. Feeling frustrated with Rafa's decision, Claude went to the yard of Rafa's and Esther's house. Here, Claude said that he wanted to take Esther away from there, asking her to leave her husband and child. Upon hearing this, Esther just laughed. She then told Claude that she would soon move to China because her husband could find better work there. Claude felt sad and disappointed because what he had dreamed of was about to vanish. He had failed to get a young mother figure like Esther. The next day, after what he had experienced and learned, Claude decided to drop out of school. He also returned all the books given to him by his teacher to his wife. Claude didn't want the writing to end with just the real life of his sadness. During lunch, Claude told Jenny that Germain really wanted to have a child but couldn't because his wife couldn't conceive. Upon hearing that, Jenny was devastated and felt deeply ashamed. Then, at school, Rafa made a confession to the principal. He informed them that the day before, Germain had stolen the math exam. Consequently, Germain was immediately fired from the school. On the other hand, Claude deliberately continued writing his story, which led Germain to briefly think that Claude having hormone activities with his wife. He then left Germain's house and left the writing there. Germain felt angry when he read the writing. He felt that misfortune kept happening to him, from being fired from the school to his wife having hormone activities with Claude. However, all of this was merely Claude's writing, playing with Germain's mind. Here, Germain intended to get rid of his wife, but Jenny managed to resist and hit her husband on the head until he fainted. A few days later, Germain was seen sitting alone. Claude approached him, and despite the fact that Claude's writing had ruined his life, he believed that Claude was a very talented writer. Claude concluded that with the help of the teacher's literary knowledge and his own writing skills, they could create a novel with a compelling true story. And the film ends.